Warning: viewer discretion is advised. Hi friends, welcome to Meals Ton Alive For, and it's the last week of the month, which means it's a location episode. I'm your host Jody Breton, and if you enjoy this episode, please like and subscribe. So today we're talking about Bonnie and Clyde, and I posted a video of the actual car that Bonnie and Clyde passed away in, and you guys went absolutely nuts. Something about this particular video went really well, so there was a ton of comments, some talking about how romantic it was, other people not even realizing that they were real people to begin with. So I figured that we should talk about it and I should tell you the actual historical story of what they did and what their crimes were. Bonnie Parker was born to Henry and Emma Parker in Rowena, Texas on October 1st, 1910. She had an older brother named Hubert and a younger sister named Billy. After only 4 years, her father, who was a bricklayer, died, causing Emma to move her and the children to Cement City in West Dallas to be near family. Bonnie was an honor student who loved poetry and romance novels, standing only 4 feet 10 and weighing 85 pounds as an adult. She dreamed of becoming an actress. In her second year in high school, she met Roy Thornton. The couple dropped out of school together, and on September 25th, 1926, she married Roy Thornton 6 days before her 16th birthday, and together they had a rough marriage, but she refused to ever divorce him, even having a tattoo saying Roy and Bonnie above her right knee. She worked at Marco's Cafe in Dallas, Texas until the cafe closed in November 1929, and Thornton would wind up in prison for 5 years, causing their separation. Even when they separated, she never removed her wedding ring. One of her regulars at the diner was Ted Hinton, a postal worker who would later join the Dallas County Sheriff's Department and be an active member of the posse that would be her demise. Clyde Chestnut Barrow was born on March 24th, 1909, outside of Tellico, Texas. He was the fifth of 7 children to Henry Basil Barrow and Cumi Tala Walker. Around 13 years old, his family moved to Dallas in 1922. His family was too poor to afford rent, having to spend the first few months living under their wagon. In 1926, he would be arrested for the first time for stealing an automobile rental, failing to return in and fleeing from police trying to recover it. His second arrest was with his brother Buck Barrow, soon after for stealing turkeys. From 1927 to 1929, he did hold some legitimate jobs, but was also dabbling in other means of income, such as robbing stores, stealing vehicles, or cracking safes open. In January 1930, Bonnie and Clyde would meet when she was just 19 through a mutual friend and began their relationship together. By only 1 month in, Clyde was arrested and jailed in Waco on charges of burglary by a Dallas County Sheriff Deputy Burt Winsnand. During this time, Bonnie would write to him and pleaded for him to stay out of trouble once he was out. On March 11th, 1930, however, while he was awaiting trial, she smuggled a pistol into his cell on McLennan County Jail, which he used to escape and fled north, but was captured just a week later in Middletown, Ohio. He arrived on April 21st, 1930 at Huntsville State Prison and would be sent in September to East Him Prison Farm. He would be essayed while in prison and retaliated by killing his attacker with a pipe, crushing his skull, becoming his first murder. Another inmate, feeling for his abuse and already serving a life sentence, took blame for the murder to avoid him being in for life. Honestly, that guy's a real one for that. I don't blame Clyde for unaliving his abuser. So the fact that he gave him another chance was really admirable since he was never going to get out of prison. I wish I knew like the name of that inmate. Late in 1932, he had another convict chop 2 toes off his left foot with an axe so he could get out of having to do labor. Ironically, by the time he decided to take this drastic step, his mother had already petitioned for his release and was successful. He was released just 6 days after that. When I heard this fact, I all I could think was how bad did the labor have to be for somebody to want to chop their own toes off to not do it? I'm just wondering, like, was he being super dramatic about this, or was it just legitimately that bad? I would like to know. This injury would be the cause of his limp and struggles to evade police throughout the rest of his life. Clyde would reunite with Bonnie, who was determined to show her devotion to him, that she began to join in his lifestyle while Clyde was hell bent on destruction and chaos after being imprisoned, with reports claiming that his wanton violence and crime spree was not to get rich or become famous, but revenge against the Texas prison system for the abuse he suffered. After Clyde's release in February 1932, he and Rolf Foltz began a series of robberies of primarily stores and gas stations. Their goal was to get enough money and firepower to raid East Ham Prison. On April 19th, Bonnie and Rolf were apprehended during a botched hardware store burglary in Kaufman, where the main goal was to get their hands on firearms. Rolf would be tried and convicted, but upon serving his time, he would never rejoin the gang. Clyde's gang, known as the Borough Gang, attempted a robbery of merchant John Butcher of Hillsborough on April 30th, 1932. Clyde knew his son and was known on site, so when the idea surfaced to rob the safe in the store, Clyde acted as the driver. Ted Rogers and an associate of Rolf Fruits, otherwise known as Johnny, would enter the store late at night and ask to buy some guitar strings. They offered a $10 bill knowing he would have to open the safe to get change and held him up during gunpoint. John Butcher also had a pistol in his safe, and as soon as he reached for it, he was shot through the heart and died instantly. Clyde was still identified by the wife, even though he was out in the car. On June 17th, 1932, the grand jury met in Kaufman and no-billed Bonnie, thus securing her release, and within a few weeks she reconnected with Clyde, and the two went on the run yet again, killing two officers in Atoka, Oklahoma, when they were apprehended in a parking lot of a dance they had attended. On August 5th, 1932, Clyde, Raymond Hamilton, and Ross Dreyer went to the country dance in Stringtown, Oklahoma, and were approached in the parking lot by Sheriff C.G. Maxwell and Deputy Eugene C. Moore. Clyde and Raymond opened fire, killing Moore and gravely wounding Maxwell, becoming the first officer Clyde and his gang killed. Shortly after, on August 14th, Deputy Joe Johns responded to a suspect stolen car at Bonnie's aunt's home where he approached the car. Bonnie, Clyde, and Raymond were all in the car and held him at gunpoint, kidnapping him while looking for another car before eventually releasing him. This wouldn't be the only officer they would kidnap. October 11th of that year, some claim that they killed a man named Howard Hall at his store during a robbery in Sherman, Texas, but some historians find this unlikely, so we can't for sure attribute it to them. W.D. Jones would join Bonnie and Clyde on Christmas Eve of 1932 at the age of 16 years old. He was a family friend of Clyde since childhood. On Christmas Day, Jones and Clyde murdered a young family man named Doyle Johnson while stealing his car. Around this time, the FBI, then just called the Bureau of Investigation, became interested in Bonnie and Clyde when an automobile stolen in Pawhuska, Oklahoma was found near Jackson back in September. They learned another car had been abandoned there when stolen from Illinois, but a prescription bottle was found in it belonging to Clyde's aunt. The investigation showed Bonnie and Clyde had visited her recently and that they were driving a similar make and model that Clyde's brother LC, who was with them, had taken the bottle. Remember this because it will be prevalent later. Clyde then killed Deputy Malcolm Davis on January 6, 1933 of Tarrant County when the two men walked into a trap set for a different criminal, raising their total number of murders to 5 since April. In this same month, Bonnie and Clyde would kidnap another officer, Thomas Purcell, for 6 hours. when he came across them and was eventually released unharmed and without his weapon. His revolver is in the photos of Bonnie and Clyde, now famous today. On March 22nd, 1933, Clyde's brother Buck received a full pardon and release. His wife Blanche and him joined Bonnie, Clyde, and Jones and set up a temporary hideout at 3347 and a half Oak Ridge Drive in Joplin, Missouri, now registered with the National Register of Historic Places as of May of 2009. Family claims that Buck and Blanche were there trying to convince his brother to turn himself in. The hideout was situated in a very quiet neighborhood where endless rowdy, drunken card games at all hours, and Clyde accidentally firing a Browning automatic rifle while cleaning it eventually led to one reporting it to the Joplin Police Department. The department suspected that they were bootleggers and set up a five-man squad on April 13th, 1933, to confront them. The Barrow brothers and Jones opened fire, instantly killing Detective Harry L. McGinnis and fatally wounding Constable J. W. Harriman. Parker, using the bar that fires a .30 caliber round, opened fire while the others fled into the car. He ran after them and jumped in, and they chased down Blanche, who was in the street chasing her dog Snowball, who had fled, pulling her in the car and fleeing. Officers testified they only fired 14 rounds themselves. One hit Jones on the side, and one struck Clyde, but a suit coat button deflected it, and Buck was grazed by a ricochet. The group fled, but left almost everything behind, with items such as weapons, a poem written by Bonnie, and famous photos of them that we all know them by. The undeveloped film was sent to the Joplin Globe, and the poem and photos were sent over to Newswire, becoming front page news throughout the United States. The group traveled as far as Minnesota for the next 3 months and continued their spree. In May, they robbed a bank in Okabena, Minnesota, and tried another in Lucerne, Indiana. They kidnapped Dillard Darby and Sophia Stone in Ruston, Louisiana, while stealing Darby's car. These stories continued to make headlines as well as the more violent episodes. They did not hesitate to shoot anyone who stood in their way, taking out both officers and innocent civilians, which eventually ended the romanticized view at the time, as people began to see that they were just ruthless killers. We'll get to the over-romanticizing and blatant lies later, though. The publications eventually made them so well known that it became hard for them to seek shelter at restaurants or motels. According to Blanche, the five of them had to live by campfire, bathe in cold streams, and being stuck in a car together eventually led to arguments until the Darby car was used by Jones one day to leave the others until he came back on June 8th. Around May 20th, however, unbeknownst to them, the FBI was investigating those cars mentioned earlier in the prescription bottle, as well as the second stolen car, finally led to the warrants issued by the FBI, which further made it harder for them to go unnoticed now. Clyde was driving Jones and Bonnie near Wellington, Texas, and failed to see signs warning of bridge construction, flipping their car into a ravine. It's unknown if it was fire or battery acid from beneath the floorboards, but Bonnie sustained third-degree burns to her leg. Jones reported later that he could see bone and muscle forcing her leg to draw up, and none of them thought she was going to live through the ordeal. She couldn't walk, so Barrow had helped carry her to a nearby farm where the family assisted her. Collinsworth County Sheriff George Corey and City Marshal Paul Hardy were sent to investigate the woman with the injuries, but they were also kidnapped and eventually left handcuffed to a tree outside of Eric, Oklahoma. The three met back up with Buck and Blanche and Nurse Bonnie's burns near Fort Smith, Arkansas. While she was recovering, Buck and Jones failed another robbery and murdered Town Marshal Henry D. Humphrey in Alma, Arkansas, forcing them to flee even with Bonnie in rough shape. In July 1933, they checked into the Red Crown Tourist Court south of Plate City, Missouri, renting two brick cabins connected by garages. Unfortunately for them, just to the south of this was the Red Crown Tavern, a popular restaurant for Missouri highway patrolmen, and the owner, Neil Hauser, was extremely observant, having made friends with law enforcement. He noted every oddity of theirs, such as registering only 3 people, but he saw 5 get out of the car, paying for everything in coins and never using bills. They backed into the garage gangster style, at the time often only done for getaways, and the next day they had taped newspapers over the windows of the cabin. Blanche was also wearing jopper riding breeches, which was bizarre for women to wear in that area, so it was obvious that they weren't from anywhere nearby. Captain William Baxter of the Highway Patrol stopped in his restaurant and Hauser relayed all the details to him. Clyde and Jones went into town to get bandages, crackers, cheese, and atropine sulfate, which drew concern by the pharmacist, so they contacted Sheriff Holt Coffee and the cabins were put under surveillance as Coffee had been alerted by Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas law enforcement to beware of anyone buying such supplies. The sheriff contacted Captain Baxter, who got reinforced by Kansas City with an armored car. At 11 p.m. on July 20th, 1933, Coffee and his officers arrived with Thompson submachine guns. A gunfight ensued, but Clyde's prized bar, stolen on July 7th from the National Guard Armory in Enid, Oklahoma, was far more powerful. One of his rounds managed to pierce the truck and short circuit the horn of the armored car, causing it to blare, and the officers mistook it as a ceasefire and did not pursue the Barrow gang as they took off. A stroke of luck for them, however, Buck had a hole blasted in his head through to the bone, exposing parts of his brain. Blanche was also nearly blinded by glass. The gang hid at Dexfield Park near Dexter, Iowa on July 24th, 1933. At this abandoned amusement park, Buck was sometimes semi-conscious but still talked and ate, but his wounds and blood loss were so severe that his brother Clyde and Jones dug a grave. Others noticed their bloody bandages and they were determined to be the Barrow Gang by law enforcement, where the police and about 100 spectators surrounded the group and they came under fire. Bonnie, Clyde, and Jones escaped on foot, but Buck was shot in the back and he and his wife were captured. He would later die from his head wound and pneumonia after surgery at King's Daughters Hospital in Perry, Iowa, just 5 days later. For the next 6 weeks, they would go west to Colorado, southeast to Mississippi, and north to Minnesota to continue robberies and robbed yet another armory on August 20th in Platteville, Illinois, acquiring 3 more bars, handguns, and a large amount of ammo. Come September, they would risk visiting family for the first time in 4 months. This is where Jones departs and continued to Houston to see his mother. He would be arrested on November 16th without incident, while Clyde would join small time accomplices and commit robberies, still while Bonnie was attending to her medical needs. Jones found out later that he was often being mistaken for another gangster, Pretty Boy Floyd. November 22nd, 1933, while trying to meet with family members near Sowers, Texas, Dallas Sheriff Smoot Smith, Deputy Bob Alcorn, and Deputy Ted Hinton lied in wait. When Clyde drove up, he felt something was off and drove past his family's car, at which point the officers stood up and fired with machine guns and a bar. Their family members were not hit, but a bullet passed through the car from the bar and struck the legs of both Bonnie and Clyde, who managed to escape yet again by stealing an attorney's car on the highway and ditching it in Miami, Oklahoma. 6 days later, a Dallas grand jury delivered a murder indictment against Bonnie and Clyde for the killing of Tarrant County Deputy Malcolm Davis back in January, becoming Bonnie's first warrant for murder. December 21st, 1933, they held up and robbed a random citizen in Shreveport, Louisiana. January 16th, 1934, Clyde planned the escape of Henry Methvin Hamilton and several other associates he knew from Easton Prison. This is why many believe his main goal was to embarrass the Texas Department of Corrections for what he went through while incarcerated. Barrow gang member Joe Palmer shot Mayor Joe Crossan during the escape, who died days later in the hospital, which caused the full power of both Texas and the federal government to decide enough was enough. Prison Chief Lee Simmons reportedly promised that all persons involved would be hunted down and killed. Texas Ranger Captain Frank Hammer was persuaded to hunt down the Barrogain despite being retired. For nearly 20 years, he was feared and admired through Texas as the walking embodiment of the one riot, one ranger ethos known for many spectacle captures and shooting a number of Texas criminals. Officially credited with 53 kills and suffering 17 wounds over his career. Prison boss Simmons said publicly that Hammer was his first choice, but there's evidence two other rangers were approached first but were reluctant to shoot a woman. Starting February 10th, Hammer was constantly on their tail, often only a town or two behind them. Easter Sunday, April 1st, 1934, at the cross section of Route 114 and Dove Road in Grapevine, Texas, now South Lake, Highway Patrolman H.D. Murphy and Edward Bryan Wheeler stopped their motorcycles thinking a motorist was in need of help. They saw whiskey bottles flying out the window and approached, but Clyde and Methvin or Bonnie opened fire with a shotgun and handgun, killing both. A farmer reported to have witnessed the incident stated that he saw Bonnie step out, walk over to one of the officers, raised her shot off shotgun, fired two more shots point blank at the officer's head, and yell, "Looky here," his head bounced just like a rubber ball. The story spread like wildfire before there began to be inconsistencies and is largely held as just a rumor now or an urban legend. This story, though, caused bounties equal to $18,000 now to be put on just the bodies of the killers, and Texas Governor Ma Ferguson, due to public outcry, added another reward of $500 each, about $9,000 on all of them as well, making this Bonnie's first time to have a price on her head, as she was believed to specifically be the killer. Public hostility was at an all-time high at this point, once Clyde and Methvin murdered 60-year-old Constable William Campbell, who was a widower and father near Commerce, Oklahoma. They did also kidnap Commerce Police Chief Percy Boyd and cross into Kansas with him in tow before letting him go, giving him a shirt and a few dollars with Bonnie's request that he inform the world she does not smoke cigars. Boyd identified Bonnie and Clyde, which resulted in an arrest warrant for murder for Bonnie finally as well. April 13th, 1934, an FBI agent received information that placed Bonnie and Clyde near the Methvins' home, and they learned that they had visited, traveled to Louisiana sometimes, with Henry Methvin. The gang was discovered to be swinging in a circle along the edges of 5 Midwestern states to exploit the state line rule that would stop officers from pursuing into other states. They also learned while investigating in Shreveport that Bonnie and Clyde, along with some of the Methvins, had staged a part at Black Lake, Louisiana on the night of May 21st, 1934, and were due to return 2 days later to visit Ivy Methvin in the Bienville Parish. The posse consisted of 6 men, Texas officers Hammer, Hinton, Alcorn, and B.M. Galt, and Louisiana officers Henderson, Jordan, and Prentice Morrill Oakley. They would set up along Louisiana State Highway 154 south of Gibbsland towards Sales, and Methvin was enlisted to park his car, looking like he needed help to get them to stop. May 23rd, 1934, they were concealed in the bushes while in early daylight, Bonnie and Clyde appeared at approximately 9:15 a.m. Clyde was behind the wheel and it slowed down as they hoped. While the car was still moving, they opened fire. Oakley is believed to have fired before any order was given, and his first shot hit Clyde in the head, killing him instantly. Hinton reported to hear Bonnie scream before they emptied 130 rounds or so into the car. Of all the wounds they survived, every wound that hit them this day would have been a fatal shot. According to Hinton and Alcorn, each of us 6 officers had a shotgun and an automatic rifle and pistols. We opened fire with the automatic rifles. They were emptied before the car even got with us. Then we used shotguns. There was smoke coming from the car and it looked like it was on fire. After shooting the shotguns, we emptied the pistols into the car, which had passed us and right into a ditch about 50 yards down the road. It almost turned over. We kept shooting at the car even after it stopped. We weren't taking any chances. Film footage by one of the deputies shows 112 bullet holes in the vehicle, in which only a quarter struck them. 17 hit Clyde, with 26 hitting Bonnie, including several headshots and one that severed Clyde's spinal column. They were so riddled that they had a hard time embalming the bodies. Stories varied widely online, with some saying that Bonnie did or didn't have a weapon, but all agree that she had a sandwich in her hand, still from when they stopped in the morning. So some of the articles say that she had a gun sitting in her lap and was holding the sandwich. Others just say that she had the sandwich. I'm not sure which. You'll have to decide that on your own. The deafened officers returned to notify their bosses, which caused the town to rush to the scene, where Alcorn and Galt were left to protect the scene. Chaos ensued as a mob swarmed them, trying to take souvenirs such as casings, broken glass. One woman cut some of Bonnie's hair off and parts of her dress. Another man was stopped from removing Clyde's trigger finger, and another supposedly trying to remove his left ear. All I'm gonna say is that people are so weird. Inside the car was an arsenal of stolen automatic rifles, sawed off shotguns, assorted handguns, several thousand rounds of ammo, and 15 sets of license plates from various states. It was towed back to the back of Conger Furniture Store and Funeral Parlor in downtown Arcadia, Louisiana. Super weird, I know, but apparently it was really common for furniture stores and funeral parlors to share space back in the day. So I guess just because it was open, they would rent the space out together. The town swelled from a population of 2,000 to 12,000 in hours, arriving by horse, carriage, and plane. Beer selling for 15 cents a bottle jumped to 25 cents, and sandwiches were nearly impossible to find, sold out everywhere. Henry Barrow identified Clyde's body and sat weeping in a rocking chair in the furniture section. Just a friendly reminder, Henry Barrow was Clyde's dad. The Darbys mentioned earlier for having been kidnapped was also an undertaker. Ironically, Bonnie reported laughing when she discovered that Darby was an undertaker and remarked that maybe someday he would be working on her. He assisted in embalming her body as he was from the nearest town over. Bonnie's funeral was attended by more than 20,000 people, causing her family to struggle to get to the gravesite, while Clyde's funeral was private. Oddly enough, the American National Insurance Company of Galveston, Texas, had to pay out life insurance policies on Bonnie and Clyde. Since then, policy changes were made to avoid deaths caused by criminal acts. Each lawman should have received about $26,000, supposedly, but most agencies then retracted their pledges of money for the bounty of Bonnie and Clyde, and each officer only made about $200, which is about $4,800 by today's standards. So let's talk about the car, the famous Ford that they actually died in. So the model was a 1934 Ford Model 730 Deluxe Sedan Forder model. So as we know, Bonnie and Clyde pretty much always stole their vehicles. So this was owned by Ruth Warren. So they received the car back after it was totaled and, they concluded their investigation. At first, the Warrens would sublease the car for carnivals and it would go on tour so that people could see it all across the country. But eventually, they bought it back and it was sold. And long story short, is it ended up at the Whiskey Pete's Casino in Prim Valley, Nevada. After Whiskey Pete's shut down, it was moved to the Prim Casino in Prim Valley, Nevada, which is outside of Las Vegas. I'm going to hold your hand when I say this, but if you've been to the East Alcatraz Museum in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, you did not see the original Bonnie and Clyde death car. You saw a replica of the Bonnie and Clyde death car. That was probably the most common thing that I had in my comments saying, this isn't the real car. If you look at the plaque underneath that car at that museum, it tells you that it is a replica. This is like the actual car. I know that that's hard to believe. There are a lot of replicas floating around the country. This is the actual car. If you look at the photos of where the bullet holes are and the actual car itself, it all matches evidence-wise that this is the actual car, not to mention the ownership history matches the original car as well. Bonnie and Clyde actually got their last sandwiches at the Ma Canfield Cafe in Gippsland, Louisiana on May 23rd, 1934. According to accounts, they ordered a fried bologna sandwich and a BLT, along with coffee and donuts, and took them to go. So, from my understanding, they didn't get to enjoy their sandwiches. Bonnie was still holding her sandwich when she died, but I decided to make homemade BLTs and some diner food and maybe pie just because I feel like it's close to what they would have had for their last meal. I hope you guys enjoyed that part of it. So, I wanted to address some of the rumors or the romanticizing going along with Bonnie and Clyde. A lot of people called it a great love story. I would disagree. Remember, Bonnie was married to somebody else during this time. She kept her wedding ring on, she had his name tattooed on her. They were only together less than 2 years, really. And not to mention, due to Clyde's carelessness, they got into an accident that probably would have killed Bonnie. There's just a lot of inconsistencies with that, and they were just romanticized through the media at first and also movies that came out about them. I also saw a lot of rumors going around that they were the Robin Hood of their time. That's absolutely false. They didn't give any poor any money. That was never substantiated. They actually never made enough money to really strike it rich. They stole about what helped them survive, and even then, they relied on family to give them money a lot of the time. So it wasn't like they were making a crazy amount of money and giving it to the poor. And on top of that, they were robbing everyday working people from convenience stores and gas stations, so they were not seen in a positive light. As for people upset about them not getting a trial and due process, I'm not disagreeing with that at all, actually. They were not given a trial, they were not given due process, but realize that they were given a death warrant. So the money that was put on their heads was dead or alive. And it really didn't matter if it was officers or not. That applied to civilians as well. So if they had been killed by civilians, they also would have gotten that money. It was open to everybody because they were just tired of them killing people. Other than that, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you found this enjoyable, please like and subscribe. I post a video almost every Tuesday, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.